Hi, everybody. This is John Hinshaw. I am the past president of the Pennsylvania AAUP, and I'm going to go through a recent survey of faculty members and talk about the state of higher education as we get close to the fall semester. And what I would say, the general overview is that we are faced with two really bad choices. We either go back to school mostly face-to-face with the kind of limitations that the CDC has put in place, and we really risk a public health disaster or public health outbreak. And a lot of people are going to get sick, and some of us are going to die. And so that's a really bad choice. And the reason we're even considering that is because if we don't come back face-to-face, if colleges and universities don't have the revenue from the dorms and the cafeterias, then the austerity is going to continue, and in fact, some schools are likely to close. Not a lot, but some. So all the trends that have been happening in higher education over the last 10, 20, 30 years are going to be given a hard shove by COVID, and that's as well as with a twist, because COVID's a pretty crazy situation. As far as I understand it, the only institution of higher education in Pennsylvania that's going fully online actually is Penn. So Penn doesn't have to worry about the revenue, right? They have a big endowment. They were a colonial institution, and their reputation as an Ivy League institution is such that they're not worried about somebody coming into Penn and saying, "Oh, I'm not getting the experience. I'm not paying tuition for that," because they're Penn. Almost nobody else can do that. I think Harrisburg Area Community College is going online. But again, they don't really get revenue from room and board, so that's easier to do. So second point, let's talk about the health risks from traditional classes, even under the kind of limited, 25% people in a classroom. That's situation that we're looking at. Our kind of original sin with COVID has been the debacle around testing and our inability to get testing together, as well as PPEs. But today, the testing is running more or less a week behind, and we have 500,000 tests a day, but that's inadequate to what we need. So because we can't get timely tests, we can't do the contact tracing and isolation that would be the next steps. So all of the kind of outbreaks really founder on the first and primary point, which is testing. And so right now, we don't have everybody in the higher ed system and in the K through 12 system putting demands on that system, of the testing system, to go back. So whatever delays and problems we have now are likely to grow. So that's part of the reason that I don't think there's really any way that we can go back safely. Two, the most important variable that I've picked up is, in terms of traditional classes, it's the amount of air that's moving through the room. It's the HVAC system, or the quality thereof. It's your ability to open a window and get outside air circulating through. You can worry less about the surfaces, but you really have to worry about the airflow. Of course, when we design buildings, we don't usually want the outside air coming in. That's not energy efficient. And so in many buildings that we teach in don't have windows, or don't have windows that can be opened up and you can put a fan in, or a two-way fan in. And the whole idea of sitting in a room, even if you have all that, with 6 or 7 students and you've all got masks on and then you've got fans blowing in it, it's going to be less than an ideal situation. So, but again, that's one of the most important things we have to try to consider. The other variable is what's happening at the K through 12 level. And I think for all the faculty, and there's many of them who have young kids or school-age kids, they're either going to have to put their kids in school, in which case they're going to be half the kids are going to try not to wear masks, or are going to either by willfulness or by just forgetfulness not do it, and so they're going to have to deal with the risk of the kind of contacting COVID from their children, or they close everything down and then everybody is who's a faculty member who has some young kids is going to be their child's tutor, plus teaching face-to-face, plus, as often is the case, teaching an online class that duplicates the original class. So that is going to just blow up in our faces, and I honestly think that people are just going to break down, psychotic break, or just something's going to give, and I can't tell you how it's going to go, except that things that can't go on forever usually don't. Now, of course, there's clear financial risk for most colleges and universities to not reopening in a face-to-face way. One AAUP chapter president, Tim Blessing, who's also another past president of the state, said, "It seems like every institution is basically looking at its neighbors, that is its competitors, to see what are they doing. And we're going to do what they're doing and so the more likely it is that Alvernia or Albright opens and has traditional classes, the more likely it is that E-Town or Lebanon Valley College is going to go face-to-face. So it's a kind of arms race situation. And of course, that's part of what's driving people to do this. Now, I think that even assuming that we go back into classes, and I think in some ways, given that the fact that even though Pennsylvania has been relatively successful in keeping its rates down, that the rates are growing, they're growing the most amongst young people. So assuming even that the schools open in late August and students come back and, things go well and there's some kind of testing, I don't think things will go very long before, I would say early October, before just, the schools either shut themselves down, local officials shut them down, which is probably the less likely, and more likely the governor, again, just kind of declares a lockdown for the state and everybody has to go online. At that point, you're going to start to see just all the kinds of cuts to benefits, cuts to retirement benefits, cuts to health benefits, furloughs, salary cuts, elimination of departments, consolidation of departments. All the stuff that we've seen is just going to be accelerating. Plus, I suspect there's going to be a couple of institutions, at least a couple, that just don't make it. And all this chaos is going to be happening in the context of an already extreme year for the Republic and a kind of very contentious election. And so I think it's just going to be another element of chaos in an already pretty stressful year. So how that all happens, I can't tell you. I mean, as Yogi Bear said, it's always hard to make predictions, especially about the future. But I think that, again, there's going to be some outcome. And, there'll be this will certainly be another element in the political universe. So there's a number of challenges that AUP chapters and AUP faculty are going to have going forward. The first is just making sure that people who want to teach online can do so. And that's a non-trivial question. The state AUP can basically be a clearinghouse of information so that we make sure that there are still a few institutions that are trying to drag their feet and get everybody into the classroom. And so we can try to help name and shame those. We can also, I think we're going to move to some kind of Google Doc and just make it possible for people at one institution to see what's going on at others and then use that information to try to come up with better policies at their home institution. I think the state will have a web page up by the fall, and we'll have a more robust social media presence, which is to say some social media presence. As a past president, I can blame myself for our inability to have a social media presence. Mea culpa. I think there's also just going to be a host of health and safety issues that we're going to have to deal with. And again, the state will try to be as good a broker or as good of a clearinghouse as we can make it in terms of sharing information. So we're talking about setting up a health and safety committee and getting health professionals, nursing PhDs and the like, to kind of participate. I think all of those issues and austerity are going to be amplified a lot by what happens with part-time faculty. I think they're just going to be the most vulnerable in all of this, and if for no other reason than they're going to get the information late. And so I think that's going to be really problematic. And then hopefully, again, with the kind of clearinghouse information, we're going to try to make sure that to the extent that people are on the tenure track, that their tenure clocks are paused, that assessment or as much busy work as crept into the profession can be put on pause or pared back as we basically deal with just unprecedented levels of a crisis. So we have a number of resources that I think people can make use of, and we will share them with you via email. There's our webpage when we get it up and running. The AFT has good guidelines. It's kind of a workplace checklist for prevention of exposure to COVID-2 virus in higher ed, and it's very useful. And then in terms of like making sure that your institution is up to speed, it's a very useful thing. The AAUP guidelines that they have online basically cover things like shared governance, online teaching, property rights, surveillance, how to kind of counteract cuts to programs and that kind of thing. And that was also available. We want to make sure that chapter officers and activists have access to as good of information throughout the state as they can have, and we'll have Zoom meetings as needed. In some ways, this makes it easier because we can spend more time in meetings than it takes to travel between chapters. So the state officers are going to be doing everything they can to kind of help you out, and with the caveat that everybody works, and so we're all kind of in this together. The last thing I will say, and then I'll talk a little bit about the survey, is that I know it comes up a fair amount where people say, well, what about the ADA? Does the ADA help us? And it's complicated. The most, as an example, I would say asthma is not covered under the ADA. You cannot get accommodations for asthma. So many institutions are providing accommodations because that puts you at major risk for COVID. So it's a complicated dance. And so one of the things that I'm hopeful, that we can make some progress on is establishing best practices throughout the profession in terms of health and safety, and that we basically make the process of getting accommodations or getting healthier classrooms or healthier workplaces, that we are able to kind of use to network our resources and to kind of share information across the board throughout the state through the Google Doc and other kinds of things. All right, I'm not going to be able to give a lot of visuals because I'm too old and not a digital native, but the survey information is going to be shared, both a summary and the full information upon request. So we asked a number of questions. One of them was about what does the fall enrollment look like? And I would say about 75% of the institutions, the fall enrollment looks about the same or a little worse. Like a little worse is on about 10% worse. There's about 8 or 9% of the institutions reported that things are a little bit better. There's a handful, and then a handful, though, about 10 or 11% said it's a lot worse, like about up to 25% worse. And so I'm just going to read a couple of quotes because, again, you can read this stuff on your own. One person from Albright said, of course, about the same can be pretty bad. We were already in trouble. We have had, so about the same as last year is a relative term. This is our 6th year without a pay raise. TAA contributions were cut 2 years ago. A colleague from Susquehanna said, they haven't had austerity yet, but they have been running a multi-million-dollar deficit. They've avoided most pay cuts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if we go online again, we've crossed the Rubicon, and and austerity is coming in to deal with us. And again, this is the kind of in terms of the information about teaching online. Is it possible for teach online? About 18% of the time, people are just able to say, "Yep, I want to teach online," and that's fine. And I think that should be about where things are now. About about 60% of people, 70%, I'm not wearing my glasses, say that you can teach online if you can get approval. So you have to get doctor's notes. You have to jump through a series of hoops through HR. You have to show that you've got an underlying health condition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then a handful of institutions, about 10%, said, nope, there's no way to teach online. There are some institutions, like at Villanova, there's a petition to kind of allow people to go fully online. There's another one at Penn State saying they should go fully online and not cut jobs as well. So again, the state is going to try to be a broker of that kind of information, and to, I would just also say that that I've been active in the state AAUP for about 15 years. I've never heard people worried about their health and safety, being worried about getting fired, getting worried about the erosion of shared governments, the way the pay situation has gone, the kind of shift of the kind of corporatization of the university. Absolutely. But this is unprecedented territory for all of us. So in terms of austerity, I would say it's already well underway. Only a handful of places are seeing job cuts to tenure track or non-tenure track lines. But what is just happening everywhere, and by everywhere I mean 50% of the places report pay freezes, 20% or 30% report pay cuts, another 45% cuts to benefits, and this is on top of seeing the kind of switching over to health savings accounts and this kind of high deductible savings programs that are basically a way of shifting the burden of healthcare onto workers. So as imperfect as this survey was, at least it gives us a kind of template, or at least a point to see what is going on now and what will be going on in the fall. And again, I think things are going to be a lot worse in not too long. And so we're all going to have to kind of struggle with that. One of the things I think is worth pointing out, and again, I apologize, you just have to look at me rather than see the visual, is that when people are cutting pay, they seem to be following the industry standard, seems to be some kind of progressive cuts. So heavier at the top, less at the bottom, in some cases nothing at the bottom. But again, it doesn't make up for the years and years and years in which administrative salaries have metastasized, and faculty salaries have stagnated mostly. But at least it's some good news, and it's something that you can probably look forward to at your institution. A couple of final points, and then I'll wrap this up. The good news is that things could be worse. The bad news is, of course, that I think they will be in terms of the austerity stuff. I think we're really looking for a very, very tough time in higher ed, and it follows years and years in which things have not been great. The only real hope I see is that because higher ed is such a big part of the state economy, because it's a big part of the national economy, it's hopeful that we might get some relief from Congress this summer. That would be ideal. And if that's the case, then I think a lot of the institutions that are saying they're going to go face to face will probably turn around and say, yeah, never mind. And then maybe we will get a new response from government, both in terms of addressing COVID and addressing the kind of ongoing crises in higher ed. Because as I would say, is that we are kind of following what happened to another great institution, which is journalism, which basically was corporatized and then downsized and now has all but disappeared, at least at the local level, and with really tragic consequences. So to imagine that it can't happen to us because we're important, because we do important essential work, I think we can look all around us and see how people who are essential are treated as expendable. And so it's up to you to make sure that this doesn't happen to us.